Good morning, campers. Welcome to Radio Camp Hapla, Percy Jackson Real Long Podcast. I'm your host, Zach.
And I'm B.
And this week we read Chapter 20 of The Last Olympian. We win fabulous prizes. Big bucks, no whammy.
This is actually a pretty straightforward chapter title in that I kind of forgot about the chapter title until just now, but it really suits what happens because it's kind of almost ridiculous. As I was reading it, I was like, oh, and then this nice thing happened. It's very neatly wrapped up, and I don't necessarily think everything's going to be neatly wrapped up because, as you mentioned while we were off mic, there's a couple chapters left, so I don't know what those chapters are going to entail. Probably some maybe wrap up stuff with other characters, because I have to bear in mind we don't have another book to do any sort of follow up. You know, we need to at least address all of the loose ends because, this is the last book in the series.
Well, this is what I'll say about this, B, is that never say never until the last page. Until you've read the last sentence, never say never. If there's more chapters, something could happen, something might not happen, or maybe it's just kind of like a preamble. And for me, when it came to the fabulous prizes, I was getting a lot of thoughts of a Return to the King, and kind of like with Lord of the Rings, and you get this, and you get this, and this is awesome.
I had a brief thought about this being like that scene in A Wizard of Oz where they all get what they need. You know what I mean?
Thing.
It's and you get you get the heart that you've always needed, and your diploma, and you get these, you know what I mean? Everyone gets their gifts that allow them.
And Dorothy, you get to go on a balloon with me for weeks on end.
Yeah, that was maybe ill-advised. But yeah, it definitely felt very much like that. It was really fascinating to see these gods who are it's really complicated theme-wise what the gods can do because so much of their own petulant needs and desires have caused bad things to happen in this series.
But then they can also cause good things to happen.
Exactly, yeah. It's just very funny for them to all get into a room and agree for a few minutes and be and you get this good thing, and you get this good thing, and it kind of puts into sharp relief all of the ways they could help things if they got along and actually worked together as opposed to being bickering jerks. And I did appreciate that Percy calls them out on that, basically.
So what you're telling me, B, is their fantasy Oprah. Everyone gets something special at the end.
Yeah, only they open the wall and it just says bees and they all start flying out.
Oh, yeah. Or no, it's oh, Ellen, you didn't. That meme they had. I heard you Fallout. You hear sirens. Ellen, you didn't.
Oh, my God. Yeah, that was probably the gods before this, but this was very out of character in a lot of ways, and even Percy acknowledges it in the narration that it's very strange for instance, Hades to be there, welcomed with open arms in Olympus.
Very cordial.
Yeah, I mean they're welcoming people that they don't normally welcome. There's a lot of sort of changes in ranks happening in this scene.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with that they've literally just defeated the big bad and everyone's kind of feeling very chipper about themselves and don't have to worry about the impending doom of their own existential crisis. Yeah, and also when it comes to this, it's the heroes coming at the end because this is kind of in the hero's journey. This is where pretty much the final confrontation has happened and they've already pierced the veil. And this is kind of almost the beginning of a return to normalcy because as we see with Percy's wish, there is a new normalcy. There is a new status quo.
Right. I really appreciated that. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit, but it's really such a contrast to the last chapter where it is very dark, everything that happens with Luke, even though he's making a sacrifice for the greater good, and it's complicated, but I mean, most of these chapters, as we've talked about, have been pretty relentlessly dark. It's been, one step forward, two steps back.
Well, I think this is the first time where you can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is where, all the horribleness is kind of, sucked out of the room, and this is where it's a time to feel kind of sullen because we see Hermes kind of say a few words to his son as he's dead.
And kiss his forehead, which is very sad. Yeah, it's this complicated emotional whiplash where there is some sort of reckoning with the grieving going on, but it's sort of this immediate moment after everything happens and everyone's just so relieved, I guess, that there isn't too much reckoning with that yet. It's more oh, here are all the positive things. You get this nice thing. This is wrapped up neatly. I feel this is setting the scene for a return to normalcy, but I think maybe in the next couple chapters that we have left, there's going to be a little bit more reckoning with the fact that people have died and there's more grieving involved than just, celebrating.
See, the way I'm looking at this, the way I'm wrapping around how it's going from sullen to happiness is kind of how I would imagine, thoughts and feelings were at the end of World War II when we quote unquote won the war.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely, it has like victory day energy where everyone's just like in this weird like one mindset of just celebrating everything being done, that there really isn't even time to sort of process all of the other complicated emotions that are happening. There's a few hints here and there, with Annabeth grieving Luke and with Grover grieving all of the like nature spirits that have died and that kind of stuff. So there's some acknowledgement of it in this chapter.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I'm waiting for the part where Percy Jackson has a ticker tape parade in New York City.
Yeah.
Like, he waves out of the limousine and all the people are like, who's this kid? He's the luckiest boy in the world. He gave a kid a knife.
You got the golden ticket.
You got the golden knife, and you got to do what's must.
You let the psychopath kill himself.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sadness, but there's a lot of hope in this chapter. I mean, quintessentially, they've won the battle, they've won the war, and this is kind of like, you get to step back. I think the best example I can give of this is I have to bring up Star Wars. You have like the throne room sequence.
Oh, yeah. With like everyone gets a medal and stuff. It's just like, it's very literal in that everyone gets like an award sort of for being in the battle.
Yeah, like you have like the throne room sequence where you have the medal where everyone gets a medal except for Chewie. And I guess Wookiees don't accept medals. But then he gets a medal at the end of Rise of Skywalker. My brain explodes because it's like, okay, we're doing this. Yeah, even like when it comes to like, you have like the finality of all of this stuff, because that's pretty much like you could have ended the whole book kind of like on that note of them all getting the medals, quote unquote, of all the prizes, because they get some prizes, pizzazes. But you have a question for you. It's gonna be a sidebar really quickly. Did you ever have to do the thing where you had to sell chocolate bars or drapes at your high school or middle school or elementary school?
We did sell chocolate bars.
I did sell the chocolate bars too.
I mean, I didn't though. Like you could sign up for it. It wasn't like required or anything. Do you ever read that book, The Chocolate War? It's not a good book.
No, I have not. Oh, I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
It's sort of about that. It's about that premise, but there's other like weird sort of Catholic school politics or something involved in it. I don't really remember what happens. I remember reading it in school and being like, this is dumb.
See, for me, I was always like really interested in getting like the RC car or like the disco light, but everything else was like, you need to send 10,000 bars of chocolate.
Yeah, I always found it just kind of weird to like sell things to win like very dumb prizes. I don't know. That didn't seem appealing to me. Like if they're doing a fundraiser that actually was worthy, it's like, okay, just donate to the fundraiser. I don't really want to do this whole thing.
My favorite was like the class that sells the most candy bars gets a pizza party from Domino's. We're going to spend the cheapest amount on these pies.
Yeah, the worst pizza known to man.
Yeah, no, okay, that's debatable. I think the worst pizza...
That's probably Cece's or something, right? Or
Cece's is pretty bad. I actually like Little Caesars pizza. There's like a hierarchy. Like I'll eat Little Caesars before Cece's.
I don't think I've eaten any of them.
Oh, man, that's because you're from New York and you're just like, this is all gross pizza.
Yeah. I mean, we have them here, but like we have so many pizza places that are closer and better that why would I like... order Domino's?
Well, B, what do you talk about? Like, when you come out here, we're going to go get some authentic Italian. We're all going to go to the Olive Garden at my house.
We're going to go to Sbarro's, like Michael Scott does when he goes to New York City.
When he goes to Sbarro's, and there's like Mama Sbarro's back there making the pizza herself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this chapter kind of opens up where the last chapter ended, where actually the Fates are the ones that kind of rise up Luke and take him pretty much to, quote unquote, the underworld or Elysium, pretty much heaven at this point. And this is where like the Fates like look into Percy, and Percy sees himself turn from a baby to an old man to being dead.
Yeah, this is some like Big Fish kind of stuff. You ever see that movie where
I've seen the Tim Burton movie Big Fish.
You look into the eye of Helena Bonham Carter and you see your death, which it hasn't been proven that you can't do that in real life, actually. I kind of believe that if you looked in Helena Bonham Carter's eyes, you would also see how you die.
Well, you just see Tim Burton become more of a Tim Burton character. He's become the very thing that he's created.
I feel like Tim Burton started as a Tim Burton character, and that's where all of his characters came from, is just him.
You've never seen The Death of Superman Lives, right? Because he does this wacky interview where he's literally in his Victorian mansion in England. It's raining outside, it's pitch black, and he's wearing sunglasses and like juxtating his arms. Like, yeah, this is Tim Burton at his finest.
Oh my god. Anyway.
Yeah, what was I going to say? Even when it comes to this, I think there's a very interesting throwback to this. It's like we go back to the very first book about what really was the Fates string and all about like where the Fates playing a role.
Yeah, so this was very nicely wrapped up. Honestly, I was surprised that there was so much like exposition. Like they really explain everything. There's no like interpretation as to what the prophecy meant, what even some stuff in the earlier books meant. Like it's straight up spelled out to you. Which kind of makes sense.
No, Percy Jackson legitimately goes through it step by step of each part and explains it, which it's a little kind of like hand-holdy a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I felt the same way, but also at the same time, let's be totally honest, sometimes me reading this on like a weekly basis, I like have just like total like brain fart where I don't totally get what's happening, where you're like, what do you think the prophecy is, Bryce? Or like whatever, like you'll ask me something and I'll be like I'll just sort of like dial up noise and I can't parse it for some reason and figure out what it means. So it's kind of nice in a way to have it neatly explained because I don't know, especially the way that we read the books, right? Like we need to think about when I read The Lightning Thief like over 2 years ago now or something like that.
You also have to keep in mind some people might not have done like a full reread of the series. You have to like people might have like read the first book when it came out, read the second one when it came out, read the third, read the fourth, and then finally read the fifth one. But also it's one of those things, it's like you look at the prophecy and that prophecy is really batty in its wording. So I guess, yes, it's a little hand-holdy, but also it makes sense because you have to explain like words and sayings of the great prophecy because it's such a great prophecy that you're not supposed to interpret it until it's already happened.
Yeah, I also like, I kind of forgive it just because also Percy himself is trying to figure out what the prophecy means. Like that's very important to him in character. So for him to be like, here are the things that we didn't really understand the meaning of and now I understand the meaning of them, like that actually is in character for him to be like, oh right, I actually thought this but it was this, and when Rachel said that I wasn't the hero I took it as an insult but it was really this. Like all that stuff would make sense as his internal monologue because the entire series, the prophecy, various prophecies have sort of overcome his mind and really, you know, taken up a lot of the plot, even like subtly. Like we're not always in the text talking about the plot, or sorry, about the prophecy, but it's like implied that the prophecies, it's like the strings that are pulling everything are the prophecy. So we have to explain it, I guess.
Yeah, no, a lot of that happens. I remember it very, very well in Titan's Curse, where he kind of breaks down the ending of that prophecy about Zoe dying and all those things. It's like, to get something across, I think this is also a very Rick Riordan thing to do, but it's also a very human thing to do. It's like, if you want to get a point across, you say it 3 times, like you're listening to it 3 times. Like he'll repeat, oh, what is this prophecy? Oh, what is this prophecy? What is this prophecy? And then once he explains it, he'll explain the prophecy. And I think that's not a bad device whatsoever. I just think it's funny that he literally went like step by step for each part of it at the ending.
No, it almost felt Cliff's Notesy because he straight up was just like, here's like the bullet points of every, like it's not even like buried in dialogue or like anything like that.
No,
he really
like
just goes down the list of like, here's this and this is what the prophecy means, and by the way, I interpreted this way, but it actually meant this. Like,
I think he's wrapping the book up to make sure that no one gets confused. Like, we're wrapping this book up, everybody. Like,
we're
I can
done.
imagine
don't
him
send
sitting
me an
by
email,
his, like,
which I relate to the impulse of don't send me an email, so I get it.
Don't at me.
I don't hate it. I'm not like, oh, I hate this hand holding.
No.
It struck me as that when I first read it, but like in some ways it's kind of nice to like not have to be like, oh wait, what happened in the first book? Oh right, the thing with the string and the fates. Like that's not really something I would remember, especially because like we don't read the books in like a normal clip of like I could have read this whole series in like a week, but instead I read it over the course of 2 years, so it's a very different experience.
We went old lady pace.
Yeah, we went at the pace of the fates.
Yeah, and even like when it comes down to the whole fates thing, I actually really enjoy that because it goes back to the first book where you have like, you know, the old lady's Nitasaka death, where you don't know whose like life force is being snipped by the yarn, quote unquote, and we always interpret it as Percy.
Right, and that just seems like, yeah, horrible foreshadowing, right, that he's gonna die, and like especially because he's the protagonist, and there really is a bait and switch that happens, you know, and I think that it's like summed up in when Rachel says you're not the hero, Percy, is we're sort of, by the function of this kind of storytelling, we believe that Percy has to be the most important. And of course he is important, but it's like a very interesting sort of diversion that Rick Riordan does where he makes you focus so much on Percy that you don't realize other people can be heroes.
No, this is a legitimately sleight of hand. You're looking at one thing, but the magician's doing something behind his back because you're so focused on one thing.
Right, and they're doing all this other stuff too with like, oh, well, the big three, and those are the heroes. So you're like, oh, well, maybe Percy's not the hero. Maybe Talia's the hero. Maybe whatever.
Well, if we break down what the parameters are, because this goes back to parameters, it's pretty much like a child of the big three will make this big choice. He's making a big choice to hand Luke his cursed knife. Pretty much what it's going by this is kind of like he fits into the parameters, but again, Percy Jackson was the hero that was almost promised in the sense of like he had to be there to hand the real hero the knife. I've always loved parallels like this where you have stories where you think one person's this big great hero, but then the prophecy kind of switches a little bit and you realize, wait a second, if we fit it up to this other character, this makes more sense. But because you're following a main character, it's great.
Let's be totally honest, though. I mean, we talked about this last chapter. I think the definition of hero is very complicated because in this situation, who's the hero? Is Luke really the hero if he's just
committing an act?
He's just basically killing himself for the greater good after he did a bunch of horrible stuff.
Well, no. So here's the thing, though. It's like you're looking at this, and then this goes back to like defining bravery, but it's like defining heroics. Like a good example of this is like, what about like a person like a grenade falls on the ground, and a soldier like looks at it and jumps on it to save his friends, and he's still committing the same crime of killing himself, but he's still technically a hero.
Yeah, no, it's like different though because it's like that it would be closer to Luke if he also had thrown the grenade. Do you know what I'm saying? Like he set these things in motion that happened to begin with. So it's a very complicated definition of hero because then I'm looking at Percy and if he handed Luke the knife, does that not make him the hero? Do you know what I'm saying? He's the one who facilitated the death of the person who caused the bad things. So
this is more like the sense of like what assisted suicide is. Is like who's really committing the suicide? Is it the person asking or is it the person doing the justice?
I mean, like, they're both involved, but also, like, who's being more heroic? Like, Percy had to give up his, like, sense of control in the situation and trust that Luke did the right thing, and then Luke had to do the right thing. So it's like, that, I don't think that necessarily negates the status of Percy as the hero. I think maybe in some ways the premise of a capital T, capital H, the hero, doesn't even really make sense in a story like this, especially like a ensemble cast of people, you know, Annabeth's the hero, Talia's the hero, Grover's the hero. They're all heroes.
Well, no, I think that's kind of the thing. It's like, I think the personification of the hero in this is everyone. Like, anyone that decides that Olympus is going to stay and is going to be good. And because of this, like, because of Luke's death, a sacrifice, also Ethan Nakamura's death, you know, his half-bloods get to thrive in a much different way.
I mean, I'd argue that Luke did something heroic in that last moment, but I don't necessarily characterize him as a hero, if that makes sense. I think he's a morally complicated character.
No, and that's kind of the tricky thing. I think it's more of the best way to use for him is he's a martyr.
Yeah, he's a martyr. I would call him a martyr. I would say that he did something maybe brave, maybe heroic, maybe even selfless. I would go that far because he did have to sort of give up all of the stuff.
Yeah, give up his own humanity to pretty much.
He gave up his own, like, sort of ideals because he got in that situation in the first place. He had to give up all of these things that he had worked towards and realize he did the wrong thing and admit he was wrong, which is difficult. But I mean, a bunch of characters had to make all sorts of sacrifices along the way, and I would definitely characterize them as more heroic than Luke. So the specific way in which he's like framed as like the hero of this story just feels very silly to me because it's like if I like, you know, caused a war to happen and then finally admitted I was wrong and then died just so I could finally end the war that wouldn't have really happened without, or maybe it would have happened, but it would have happened differently, or I helped it happen or whatever. I don't know. We talked about that last chapter. So
So for me, when it comes to all the stuff about the quote unquote, the person that destroys the villain, I'm going to have to go back in time and talk about Deathly Hallows and how how Harry Potter technically wasn't the person to defeat Voldemort. It was Neville Longbottom because he killed Nagini.
And that's like another that's very similar. We've talked about how this like idea of like a prophecy is a prophecy and it can like, as long as you fit the parameters, you can be the chosen one. And like, that's the same thing with Harry Potter where Neville was supposed to be the chosen one also.
No, that's like, the reason why Snape hates him so much is because it was like an either or situation. Well, they're both born on the same day. So let's just pick one, and maybe we might be right, or maybe we'll just kill them both, but then something bad happened.
Yeah, I just find it very fascinating that, like, in some ways, this is trying to subvert the idea of the hero because you're so misled into thinking Percy is the hero, but that's also not true. It's not true that Luke is the hero either. I think basically everyone is except for Luke, probably, and like the main antagonist.
But here's the thing, though, B, and when it comes down to that, is it's like he might not be the hero that is promised, but he's still technically a hero. It's like subverting expectations, because throughout history, there are so many stories of like, good example of this is, I guess, a lot of like Arthurian myths, or like a poor peasant woman or someone turns out to be a mystical sorcerer. Or a better example of this would probably be in Star Wars. We have Yoda, you see in like Empire Strikes Back, and like Luke doesn't understand that like this small frog person is a great Jedi master. Like he thinks it's just this weird crazy kook trying to steal a space hot dog. But then when he lifts the X-wing out of the water, Luke's like, oh god, this is bad.
So you're saying that Luke is revealed to be something more than he is? Is that kind of...
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of like what's happening here. And I'm just saying, like, in a lot of mythology, like I'm using like the trope of like, is this the real hero or is this the other one? It's like there's a lot of examples of this in a lot of Greek myths as well. Like, again, another example of this would probably be Oedipus, where it's like you have all these parameters, and at the end of the day, it was his own parents' undoing that made Oedipus, take his own eyes.
I guess I just wanted to like argue with the premise of like this specific lesson, because I think in some ways Rick Riordan's like, haha, I was clever. I made you think one person was the hero when it's actually this person. And like, in my opinion, and probably to some extent Rick Riordan's opinion, the way that he writes the book, like the hero is in the community of people who work together. Like the sort of a collaboration is what was heroic, right? Like that's the lesson of this chapter in some ways, right? Everyone's finally getting along. They're sitting in the same room. They're acknowledging their, the ways in which they've let each other down. They're acknowledging ways in which people have risen to the occasion, that they should be respected, that maybe in the past they haven't been. Like this is like a very like healthy, productive situation, and it all comes from this like perspective like, oh, we worked together to do this thing, why can't we work together in other ways? And then like I think going from that to like, oh well, there's a one single hero that saved us all, completely like discounts the idea that there's no such thing as one single hero, that there couldn't be.
No, I think when it comes down to it, because for me, I totally agree with you. I think it says Percy Jackson right on the cover, but really it's Percy Jackson and his host of friends, because without his friends, he would be dead so long ago. He'd still be a guinea pig, pretty much. Like, there's a lot of, like, interesting elements when it comes to Percy Jackson. Like, it isn't Luke, it isn't Percy, it isn't Thalia, it isn't Nico. It's everyone working together. It's like we are Legion, almost, or we are Hero. In the sense of, like, you need everyone to work together.
They're, like, drift compatible. They all, like, snap together into one giant monster fighting being. Like, in some ways it's true,
Oh man, that makes me sad that we never got the Statue of Liberty kaiju battle.
I really wanted that to happen. That's just my mind's eye. If we could get some fan art of that, I would really appreciate.
Of course, like, are you guys drift compatible? Do.
Yeah, they're just like in the weird crown of the Statue of Liberty, and she's waving stuff around. And
it'd be great. Like, really the torch is like a flamethrower, and the shield's like impenetrable. It'd be so great.
That's what I'm saying. And it's like creepily reciting, like, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And then it's like,
so we can kick your ass with them.
Stabbing.
I think even like with the death of Luke, like, I love the Hermes scene. I love all those elements of this. And then we get into the actual like council moment, which for me reminds me a lot of the ending of Return of the King, where everyone comes together and pretty much like they all have like their council. And this is where everyone's like awarded prizes. It's like, you hobbits, you do not have to kneel for anyone but yourselves. And it's like a big, beautiful moment.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty bog standard scene in like a sort of hero's journey type of story, where it's like, okay, well,
you blew up the Death Star, and now
we're all together,
rewarded.
and you get a prize, and you get a prize. And it's like, again, we've talked a little bit about this already. It gets wrapped up pretty hilariously neatly, and I do acknowledge there's a couple chapters left, so I don't know what's going to happen after this. But just like, even just like we said, Percy explains the prophecy. I might just read that passage real quick. As they left, I thought about the great prophecy. The lines now made sense to me. The hero's soul cursed blade shall reap. The hero was Luke. The cursed blade was the knife he'd given Annabeth long ago. Cursed because Luke had broken his promise and betrayed his friends. A single choice shall end his days. My choice to give him the knife, and to believe, as Annabeth had, that he was still capable of setting things right. Olympus to preserve or raise. By sacrificing himself, he had saved Olympus. Rachel was right. In the end, I wasn't really the hero. Luke was. And I understood something else. When Luke had descended into the river Styx, he would have had to focus on something important that would hold him to his mortal life. Otherwise, he would have dissolved. I had seen Annabeth, and I had a feeling he had too. He had pictured that scene Hestia showed me, of himself in the good old days with Talia and Annabeth, when he promised they would be a family. Hurting Annabeth in battle had shocked him into remembering that promise. It had allowed his mortal conscience to take over again and defeat Kronos. His weak spot, his Achilles heel, had saved us all.
So pretty much, in the end of the day, it's his own hubris and kind of like, I need to be the protector of everyone that kind of, is the great MacGuffin, is, the final, card in the house of cards.
Right. His connection to Annabeth actually ends up allowing him to remain human and allowing him to, like, briefly for a second overcome Kronos and do the right thing.
Just enough for him to commit seppuku, yes.
Yeah.
To sum it up really well, I think it's the poison for Cusco. Cusco's poison. The poison for Cusco.
the blade for Luke. Luke's blade.
Right. And the Kronos is like, I don't like spinach puffs. You don't like my spinach puffs?
Pull the lever.
Pull the lever, crunk. Wrong lever. Even when it comes down to, like, the rewards that they get, I think they're so fitting. I actually love these rewards that they get. It isn't just like, and you get this awesome flamethrower, and you get this tin can of tuna.
No, they don't. There's no, like, one-size-fits-all award. Like, right, and they're not all physical things, too. They're, like, titles and abilities and things that sort of play to their strengths, which I find very satisfying, because, like, they're sort of being validated in ways they haven't been throughout this series.
This what kind of reminds me of? It reminds me a lot of how, in history, like, this stuff happens where, like, people, like, someone will save, like, a lord, or someone will save the king or somebody, and they'll be bestowed, like, lands or something. My favorite example of this is actually, Sir Isaac Newton's dad actually saved a rich nobleman from drowning. And to thank him, was like, I would love to pay for your son's schooling. Pretty much the nobleman was like, I could just give you lands and stuff, but I'd rather it's more important that your children are able to read and do all these things as you've saved my life. So that's where we get Sir Isaac Newton and gravity. I love that.
And there you go. That, yeah, like paying it forward in some ways. I do find that satisfying in about this chapter is that, like, they're not just giving them physical things or just, like, abilities, but they're sort of, like, encouraging something.
And you, Annabeth, you get a can of tuna. We know how much you love tuna. Yum, yum. No, it isn't like that either.
It's like they're being encouraged to do something that they actually care about. Like, with Annabeth, she's encouraged to continue on with her architecture. With Percy, he's given finally the chance to sort of, like, make positive change in a system that he's always had qualms with, which is complicated because it's similar to what Luke said.
We'll get to that one, because for me, I think this one's a really interesting one. It's going to come back into kind of like what I think of, like, quintessentially as Americana in this way. I think this was a very interesting, deliberate thing that he did. And I kind of like the whole, like, scene they have in the beginning where everyone's meeting up, like, Ares meets Clarice, and they're, like, of course, really awkward with each other. You see that, Annabeth's leg gets fixed up by Apollo. Like, oh yeah, I'll just fix this up real lickety split.
Yeah, this is, like, it's truly hilarious how many things get wrapped up. So, like, okay, Annabeth is better mostly because Apollo has, like, magical healing powers. Clarice gets to see her dad, and she's, like, actually
like, impressed.
Bestowed, like, infection. Yeah, I almost said affection. Got coronavirus on the brain.
Coronavirus.
He's like actually affectionate towards her and, like, pats her on the back and says, "Oh wow, you slayed the Draken. I'm so proud of you." Whatever. I don't know if he says I'm so
proud.
That's
my daughter. That's my son. Like, that's kind of like when I'm thinking about the trope of, like, in every sports movie where you have, like, the loser person on the team that does something amazing, and the hard ass dad or parent is just like, that's my son.
That's my son. Yeah, that's exactly what Ares is, because he's still kind of a jerk, but he's a jerk.
He's a sports dad.
Clarice, where he's like, yes, you're he's such a sports dad. That's exactly the energy he's bringing. And then she's just like finally, you know, scored the winning goal of the game or something. Like that's kind of what's happening here. And it's complicated, and I feel a little bit weird about it because I wish that she didn't really want approval from Ares because he is a jerk, but I'm happy that she gets that.
Wouldn't that be like the moral of the story then? Is like she rejects that and just like, I did it for myself, I did it for Selena?
Yeah, that's like one thing that I would probably have a problem with is like, yes, I'm happy she gets the validation she wants, but at the same time, I wish she kind of didn't even need that validation, if that makes sense, because she seems like she doesn't care about what other people think. But obviously, as like demonstrated, that her weakness is that Ares like doesn't really give her like the positive affirmation that she so desperately needs, the validation, all of that. I mean, that's a theme throughout these books with all of the demigods, but I wish she didn't need that. You know what I mean? Because I don't care. Who cares about what Ares thinks, you know?
When it comes down to the whole thing, I love, my favorite part of this actually is kind of like when they see Hades and everyone's like, oh, Hades, you're here, but you get to stay here because we're all sharing this piece of the pie, and Nico's there.
And he has to, like, sit on, like, a weird chair that isn't...
like a fold-out chair.
Throne. Yeah, like, just sits by the fire, and then, like, Nico sits by his feet, and he's like, hey, guys. Like, yeah, like a weird, like, fold-out chair that you would get for, like, a wedding that you did in your backyard. Like, he's just
No, but it's like a banquet chair. Have you ever, like... They're not fold-out chairs, but you know what I'm talking about, where you go to, like, the convention or the dining hall or the...
Yes.
I remember, like, the Veterans Hall Association, those places, yeah.
Yeah, banquet chair, just sitting there, like, awkwardly next to the fire, like, hey, guys, you know how you never let me come here? Except on the winter solstice?
Well, this is the reason why I hate you guys. This is the exact reason. Even then, what I love about this is that even Chiron's alive. Like, they have, like, all these moments where it's, like, all the people that aren't dead are now alive.
Oh, yeah, the wrap of that was, like, kind of silly. Did you find that a little silly?
Oh, it's where Miss O'Leary, like, pulls him out of the rubble, and he's just like, I'm okay, everybody.
Truly, the way it's written is almost, like, a joke? I don't really know how to...
Well, no, there's actually a reason for that, B, and the reason would be is that he can't die unless pretty much no one needs him anymore.
Right. That's true. So it's in a weird way a curse. Next few hours were a blur, which this passage is a blur. I remembered my promise to my mother. Zeus didn't even blink an eye when I told him my strange request. He snapped his fingers and informed me that the top of the Empire State Building was now lit up blue. Most mortals would just have to wonder what it meant, but my mom would know. I had survived. Olympus was saved. The gods set about repairing the throne room, which went surprisingly fast with 12 super powerful beings at work. Grover and I cared for the wounded, and once the Sky Bridge reformed, we greeted our friends who had survived. The Cyclopses had saved Talia from the fallen statue. She was on crutches, but otherwise she was okay. Connor and Travis Stoll had made it through with only minor injuries. They promised me they hadn't even looted the city much. They told me my parents were fine, though they weren't allowed into Mount Olympus. Mrs. O'Leary had dug Chiron out of the rubble and rushed him off to camp. The Stolls looked kind of worried about the old centaur, but at least he was alive. Katie Gardner reported that she'd seen Rachel Elizabeth Dare run out of the Empire State Building at the end of the battle. Rachel had looked unharmed, but nobody knew where she'd gone, which also troubled me. Nico D'Angelo came into Olympus to a hero's welcome, his father right behind him, despite the fact that Hades was only supposed to visit Olympus on winter solstice. The god of the dead looked stunned when his relatives clapped him on the back. I doubt he'd ever gotten such an enthusiastic welcome before. Like, literally just everybody summed up. Oh yeah, Clarice too. Clarice marched in, still shivering from her time in the ice block, and Ares bellowed, "There's my girl." The god of war ruffled her hair and pounded her on the back, calling her the best warrior he'd ever seen. That draken slaying, that's what I'm talking about. Like, that's such a hilarious, like, passage of just like, all right, here, everybody, this guy's fine, and here's fine, and they cleaned up the room, and everything's fine. Like, not fine, but like...
And then we found Ethan Nakamura, and he was okay, too.
Yeah, right? Like, they pick up his destroyed body.
His corpse.
Yeah, his skeleton.
No, for some reason, I'm imagining it like a cartoon where it's like his body's like an accordion now. Yeah.
Have you watched What We Do in the Shadows, the TV series?
Yeah, I love What We Do in the Shadows.
I'm not gonna say who it is, but someone gets burned to a crisp, and they're just like holding up the weird burnt husk of the body. Like, that's what I imagine Ethan Nakamura is.
But like, I'm just imagining, like, you know, we have a hero's welcome, and then this is where they start to be presented the prizes, the prizes, and I love, like, the first one is like, Oh, yes. Oh, yes, Grover, you'll be part of the Cloven Elders. And he, like, passes out, like, what the heck's happening here? I'm going to be the nature god?
Yeah, and then he doesn't get to hear. I loved that part, too, because, the delivery of it, from Dionysus is so, like, I don't know, matter of fact, I guess. Well, oh, also, speaking of Dionysus, he acknowledges that Pollux was spared in the fighting. So he actually says Percy's name correctly, which I guess happens, once every 3 books?
Yeah, he says Percy's name correctly. I was about to say that. B, are you a mind reader? I was about to bring that up. Like, oh, I forgot something important.
Yeah.
Here's the problem, though, B, is that there's a kind of an inconsistency. He didn't gloat about his high score in Pac-Man.
Or, like, I don't know. It's kind of, we talked about this. It's a little bit like, does he really care that much about his kids? He hasn't really shown much interest before. And then he made this, but
yes,
then he made
he does. This kind of proves it, doesn't it?
With Percy, which I don't really. It's kind of a weird out of character moment because he doesn't seem to care about his kids, and then I guess he does, and then he says Percy's name correctly.
Well, yes, he does. I mean, it's like kind of like it's social distancing. B, didn't you know this? He has to say
Dionysus invented social distancing.
yes, he did. And then you get to Annabeth, which I think out of every character probably has the best reward out of all of them because it's, I want to talk about this one because it's, for me, it's a very important one because this one has always stuck with me.
Well, because it's not just like a superficial prize. It really is encouraging her own growth. Like, they're not like, oh, you get this thing. It's like, you get to do this thing. We trust in you. And I think that that's maybe one of the better types of awards you can get at the end of all this.
Yes, and I think when it comes to it, it's like Athena pretty much gives Annabeth like, oh yeah, so all of Olympus is kind of blowed up, and we want you to basically recreate Olympus in your own vision, however you'd like to build it, and you get to have as much freedom as possible. And because your dream is to become an architect, this is her dream since the first book is to become an architect and build things to rival Olympus. But guess what? She gets to make Olympus. And for me, I think that's such a powerful message because it gives like, not even like, joking aside, this is just, we know how much we know. We talk about Annabeth. We kind of like, oh, this is when she's like doing her romancy stuff. But like when she gets to have her own dream, her reaction is so genuine about this. Like she pretty much like breaks down and cries in the sense of like, she's so happy about this. And like, I can imagine like, all the little boys, all the little girls, all the YA people, everyone in between. This is probably one of the most beautiful messages you can give to anyone. Like, you can get to achieve your dream, and you get to build whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about the musical, right? And Annabeth singing My Grand Plan, and that's like truly, I mean, that's supposed to be like her character song.
B, what is her grand plan?
That she would be remembered, which is, I mean, that's like the second line in the song, basically. And that's, I mean, to be remembered is like, yeah, you're creating Olympus again. Like that's
Pantheon
like
again.
The most eternal you could be. Like it's very funny because there's a lot of talk of like how people are remembered in this scene because they bestow this ability for her to like recreate Olympus with her own visions, and then all of these gods are clamoring, being like, oh, well, make sure there's enough statues of me or whatever. So there's just like, she's kind of on the same level as them.
Like, make sure to give me a statue with a big sword.
Yeah, where they're all like very concerned with like how people remember them and what their legacy is going to be.
When I look at this, I look a lot like how in Hamilton, one of the main themes of that is like, what is a legacy? Yeah. How does a legacy define you? Because you might be named after a street, or you might write all these documents, and people will forget about you until this little musical happens. Like, what defines a legacy? And I think for me, it's like, Percy, his will probably be, you could become a god, but gods fade away, but buildings last. And for me, that's a much more powerful thing, especially
especially Olympus. I mean, it can be destroyed, but I think it's not just like the actual building she's building, though, right? The fact that she's trusted with that is like a sort of validation of her capabilities and her strengths. You know what I mean? It's not even necessarily, because obviously it can be destroyed because it was destroyed in battle, but it's more like what it represents. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing, though, B, and when it comes down to it, she's actually given the most important job because Kronos' whole plan was to destroy Mount Olympus. When you destroy Mount Olympus, you killed the gods themselves. So she's getting to rebuild it, possibly giving the better qualities to the gods, or maybe, making an image, which for me is such a beautiful message because we see that even with like when she gets a laptop with Daedalus, and Daedalus is like, you'll make some great things with these. Make sure to use them well. Like for me, I've always loved that message of Annabeth. That's why she's one of my favorite characters, is that she gets to be creative, but also she gets to shine in this way that no one else gets to shine because, her hubris is that she knows everything, but in the end of the day, she kind of knows everything, and that's kind of the funny thing about her is that that's what makes her an interestingly creative character.
Well,
yeah, in that way.
She's like it's sort of like like that Malcolm in the Middle line where it's like I happen to complain of exactly as much as I should for someone in my situation. It's like she happens to be as full of herself as she should be in her situation, where it's like, yes, she's kind of like believes that she can make the world in her specific image and like make everything better, but she's kind of right too. She is a very capable, smart person. They even say like, and you studied under Daedalus and you all know all these things and you're an amazing architect. Like, it's kind of nice to see her validated in that way, because like,
and you're only 16.
Think for a second, like, not only is she really good at that, but there's so many moments where Percy doesn't know what the heck is going on. He doesn't understand like through like Greek mythology exactly what they're dealing with. He's not as well-rounded as far as like understanding circumstances or knowing what to do in a situation. And Annabeth always seems to know. She has a plan. She has an idea. She's, the child of the goddess of battle strategy. So like there's she's a smart person. She sometimes takes a little bit too far, but I don't know. I think she deserves this.
Well, I think a lot of creative people will take things a little too far. I feel like that's kind of the curse. Is like when you get like wrapped up into something, like you can get like super invested into something. Like you think you know everything about it, and you don't want to hear other people's thoughts about it until it's too late.
Well, like that's why hubris is her fatal flaw, is because she thinks that she's the best, then she doesn't need any input from anybody, and that's probably why she and Percy butted heads so much, is because every time he kind of gave her any bit of advice, she was very stubborn in listening.
She turned it down. She smacked it right down like an ant. And then when Percy does the smartest thing, I guess, with like Luke, that's where like she has to like fall into like, okay, Percy has to have this plan. He's the one with the plan.
She trusts that he has a plan.
And I love that. I love that she gets to rebuild Olympus. And for me, that is such a beautiful,
that was really nice,
perfect ending to Annabeth in that way. And then we get to Percy Jackson. No, then we get to Tyson's, and I love Tyson. He's literally in charge of the whole Cyclops army now, if they ever need him. And I think that's adorable.
Yeah, it's so sweet. And I love how because he's such a sweet character, he's not even like full of himself or like whatever, we did great. He's just like, yeah, we did it, Percy, and you're alive and I'm alive. And he's just like, he's not even really concerned with these titles or like what he's being bestowed. He's just like, all these Cyclopses really respect him, but that's like not even what he really cares about, which is kind of nice. It's like a very consistent character thing for him.
This kind of like wraps up his character arc, because if we see Tyson in the first book, or I guess this is Sea of Monsters when he's introduced, is that all he wants is friends and people to accept him. Like when he gets to camp, everyone's like Cyclops racist to him. And by the end, this is the exact opposite, where like everyone's accepting him. He is now an equal among gods at this point, because he's the one that's going to be leading the charge, so to speak. And he's also awarded the world's greatest weapon, a big stick. And I love that.
Yeah, he's like, stick. And they're like, we'll give you a great stick.
For fetching. This is for Miss O'Leary, too. It's a joint weapon.
Yeah. So he gets a new club, I guess.
Yeah, he gets a new club. And then we get to Percy's. I think Percy's is the most interesting because for me, when I'm looking at this as like Rick Riordan writing it. He's looking at, denying this huge power, but also making something better out of the power that he's given.
Can I say something that I think is kind of funny? What do we say at the end of every episode?
Keep staying mortal?
And what is the decision that Percy has to make?
Keep staying mortal?
Yeah, like it's literally like he has this moment where he gets like, they're like, oh, this is the kind of power we have, so it's obviously the power you want. You want to live forever. And like for a brief second, he considers it, but that's really not what he wants, which is kind of in some ways the tension that they, introduce in the very beginning of the book series, where it's like, on the one hand, you can be like a god, and on the other hand, you can be a person and you can like live a normal life and have friends.
So B, what does this kind of mirror, like this whole philosophy? Because Rick Riordan's doing something very deliberate here.
Oh, you mean that he chooses not to be a god?
Yeah, they chooses not to be a god.
It's more meaningful that he wants to live out his life as a normal person, if that makes sense.
So the way I'm looking at this, it is boiling down what is America, in the sense of like, we look at George Washington. This is the exact same choice that he was given. Pretty much like, do you want to be king or do you want to give power to the people?
Oh, like term limits. I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's what I'm thinking about here is like, this is a very deliberate thing. This is just like the idea of the U.S. presidency is pretty much, you give power to the people rather than one singular person. I mean, George Washington decided, you know what, I want to be king. We go from King George III to King George I. We're going to have a problem here. We have to give it.
Right.
We have to set these rules, even though we didn't have like 2 terms. That was his precedent.
Well, I mean, that's also the contrast between Percy and Annabeth in that she does have that
Martha?
Impulse to think that she. Well, no, she has that impulse to believe that she would make
all power
the right choices and could be like more powerful. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Because we were talking about her hubris. Well, Percy, when they're having that conversation, he totally doesn't relate to that. And he's like, oh, I never know what I'm supposed to be doing or whatever. I don't think he trusts himself with that power or really feels like he needs it. That's not his personality at all. He's loyal to his friends. That's his fatal flaw, is that he cares about the people around him. And I think it matters more to him to like live a normal life and, spend time with Annabeth, spend time with his friends, with his family, than to renounce all that to become a god. I mean, even the way he describes this whole scene where they offer him immortality, Annabeth looks at him and he says, oh, that's the same look that I gave her when she was considering being a hunter of Artemis. It's that same thing of like, oh, am I going to lose this person to this like greater cause that they want to commit themselves to? But Percy doesn't want to do that.
Well, I mean, if he chose that, he would have been a hypocrite, wouldn't he?
Oh, he would have been such a hypocrite also. But like the thing is, that was alluring to Annabeth because she did want to have that kind of power. Well, Percy, I don't think ever did. That's just not really in him. And instead, what he elects to have as like a sort of prize, I guess, or when he makes everyone swear on the river Styx.
I think it's a much better thing because it's more of a power to the people type of move.
Exactly. This is like such a great thing, is he trades in this amazing thing that they're trying to give just him to give everybody an opportunity. And honestly, it's kind of, to some extent, I'm like, oh my God, Percy, that's like not one thing you're asking. He asks for like a whole change of like the entire system of gods and demigods.
Well, that's because Zeus kind of shot himself in the foot. You can have any wish you want, Percy. Anything at all.
Yeah, and they think he's gonna like ask for something really superficial because he's a teenage boy. But instead, he's so selfless and amazing, and that's kind of why in some ways I'm like frustrated at like the painting of like Luke being selfless, when like this is exactly why Percy is so different from Luke, is that he's actually selfless in a way that like has nothing to do with him. He completely gives up the opportunity to like have something for himself in order to help other people. And ideologically, it's actually kind of similar to Luke, right? He had a lot of problems with the way that demigods were treated, but he goes about it in a totally different way.
Well, I think it's a mixture of the two ideologies that pretty much that Ethan Nakamura had and Luke. It's like tear it all down, but Ethan wanted balance because that's what Nemesis represents. There's no balance. Like, everything's quote-unquote been already torn down, like, the Pantheon's destroyed, but they're kind of like, they're restructuring, and you're looking at, like, this balance, which I think all the things he asked for are so reasonable that's, like, this is how you prevent pretty much Kronos from coming back. It's like, everyone has to be claimed, everyone has to be loved, and at the end of the day, everyone needs to have a place at the table.
They've only defeated the symptoms of the problem, because it was the actual like system that led to all this happening in some ways. I do want to read this because it's like, it was very satisfying for him to just be like, and one more thing. And it's sort of like this like fever dream of like, oh, if only you could like go to like the powers that be and ask for everyone to be treated fairly. That's kind of what this like, it's like a power trip that I find personally very satisfying. Like, that's what I would want if I was given like an amazing gift from a pantheon of gods. I wouldn't want power for myself. I'd be like, oh, can you like fix all of these things that like cause society as a whole to suffer? Because that's so much smarter. It's not just limited to you.
B, we're gonna have a problem. I wanted rocket boots, but your idea is much better.
Yeah, well, you know what? The greater, maybe you need rocket boots for the greater good. I don't know. I would throw that in there as an addendum, but I do want to.
Is that what you're gonna give me? Oh, and Zach, I want to make the world a better place. No, also give Zach rocket boots. Yeah.
So solve world hunger. Make sure that everybody is taken care of and treated equally. Also, rocket boots for Zach.
For me, I think that's also a very beautiful message in Percy Jackson. You have this idea of everyone needs to be treated fairly because we see this a lot. It is revised over and over and over again pretty much from the very first chapter, with, we were talking about like dyslexia and people not understanding him, to pretty much finding a family and finding this common goal. Once he figures out that, everyone has the same disabilities as him, but everyone's not treated equally because it goes by their parentage. Now he's going to solve the whole issue.
Right. It's sort of like, it's funny in a way because he escapes this hierarchy that exists in human society of being treated differently because of his like disabilities or because of his whatever, his circumstances. And then he meets the demigods and thinks, oh, this is like an escape from this. But really he just finds yet another system that is unequal. And I find it really nice that he like recognizes that. I mean, he recognizes that in the first book. And that's kind of why Luke tries to tempt him, the scene with the scorpion where he's like, you agree with this too. But Percy does the smart thing and he like sacrifices an award for himself in order to actually help people. And it's sort of like this weird mirror image of Luke where it's like almost the same goal, but it's coming from a completely different place. I do want to read the passage.
Well, this is where I believe that Luke was kind of like a martyr in the situation because of him. His message got to get across in a more positive light than if you were to tear down Mount Olympus.
Well, first of all, he makes them swear on the river Styx, which I found
funny
to be character growth.
I mean, that's character growth, but also it's funny because for me, he like looks at Hades and Hades gives a chuckle because he's like, "Yeah, you fell for that.
You forgot to swear on the river Styx." He's like, "Yeah, you gotta do that to make sure that it's
you got a pinky promise quit essentially."
Right. So I'm glad that he did that because that's sort of. It demonstrates some learning on Percy's part. This is probably the smartest Percy has ever come across in the series is this chapter where he, like, remembers everything. He's like, oh, right, I figured out the prophecy, and also I'm going to ask for all these things, but I'm going to make sure. Swear on the river Styx, so it actually counts.
I pinky promise.
Right, basically that. From now on, I want you to properly recognize the children of the gods, I said. All the children of all the gods. Percy, my father said, what exactly do you mean? Kronos couldn't have risen if it hadn't been for a lot of demigods who felt abandoned by their parents, I said. They felt angry, resentful, and unloved. They had a good reason. Zeus's royal nostrils flared, which is a very funny description. You dare accuse no more undetermined children, I said. I want you to promise to claim your children, all your demigod children, by the time they turn 13. They won't be left out in the world on their own at the mercy of monsters. I want them claimed and brought to camp so they can be trained right and survive. Now wait just a moment, Apollo said, but I was on a roll. And the minor gods, I said, Nemesis, Hecate, Morpheus, Janus, Hib, they all deserve a general amnesty and a place at Camp Half-Blood. Their children shouldn't be ignored. Calypso and the other peaceful Titan kind should be pardoned too. And Hades, are you calling me a minor god? Hades bellowed. No, my lord, I said quickly. But your children should not be left out. They should have a cabin at camp. Nico has proven that. No unclaimed demigods will be crammed into the Hermes cabin anymore, wondering who their parents are. They'll have their own cabins for all the gods, and no more pact of the big three. That didn't work anyway. You've got to stop trying to rid of powerful demigods. We're going to train them and accept them instead. All children of all the gods will be welcome and treated with respect. That is my wish. Zeus snorted. Is that all? Percy, Poseidon said, you ask much, you presume much. I hold you to your oath, I said, all of you. Oof. Am I right?
When I'm looking at this, I think the most important thing that Percy Jackson has done is pretty much he's given freedom to everyone in the sense of, like, you can have equality. Everyone has a place at the table. The Pantheon should now be a circle rather than, like, a semicircle as it's presented right now. I guess it's like an Arthurian myth. It's like the reason why there's the Knights of the Round Table, so there's no favorite seats, quote unquote. And I love that about, like, he looks for the people that are neglected. He looks for the people that have been pretty much abused in the case of like Nico and all the children of Hades.
Yeah, or even Hades, I mean, is treated like he's not allowed in Olympus except for like once a year. Like there's a weird power discrepancy that happens.
Does he have to sit on the banquet hall chair?
Yeah, exactly. I think back to when we first started reading the series, right? If you remember when we get introduced to Camp Half-Blood and they're trying to kind of do like the magical Harry Potter thing of like, this is the new magical world we're being introduced to and it's a summer camp and look how cool this is. And then you find out the rules and you're like, wait a second. So they all get crammed into the Hermes cabin unless they get claimed and a lot of people don't get claimed. And then Hades kids just don't even have a cabin at all. Like immediately it doesn't, if you have like any sense of right or wrong or fairness, you're like, this doesn't seem right. And even Percy's like, this doesn't doesn't seem right.
I think that's kind of the important thing that Rick Riordan has done here is he's made the sense of fairness. I think this also comes from a place of being a teacher and like maybe observing like people being picked for a dodgeball game, and there's always like the odd man out, like who do you pick for the team? And this is like everyone gets a place at the table, everyone gets a chance to be free. And this goes back to, Luke becoming a martyr in the sense of his vision gets to be kind of fulfilled of, literally Percy Jackson's fulfilling Luke's dying wish and not forgetting the people that haven't been unclaimed or have been neglected. You bring your sick, you're weary, and you're weak, and you're welcome into Camp Half-Blood now with open arms, and everyone gets a seat. And you've fixed so many problems, like you pretty much like Lance the Boyle in the sense of like, well, you have all these people that are neglected. Of course, they're going to be like Luke. They're going to feel angry. They're going to feel pissed off. But now they're all going to be accepted. I'm interested to see like all the other cabins now. Like, what is Morpheus going to do? Are they all going to like sleep in their cabins and stuff? Or
yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if those count as demigods exactly or what the situation is.
No, they're minor gods, aren't they? They're still demigods. Well, Ethan Nakamura's a demigod, and he's a son.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
So they'd have that. I'm just imagining, what about like Nico's new palace? Is it going to be a bone palace?
Maybe, yeah, really spooky.
It's just going to be the Haunted Mansion from Disneyland.
Haunted house, yeah. We both went for the same joke, so yeah, it'll be the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah, no, for me, I think this is such a beautiful thing because I think Percy is given a much better, like, this is how he's going to be remembered.
Right. I really liked this scene a lot. I found that very selfless and thoughtful of Percy to take a moment and go, wait a second, I don't want to live forever. I don't want the power of being a god. I just want to help people and change the system that led to all this to begin with. And I just really respected that decision. And I'm happy that it ended up being like what Percy's sort of like resolution is at the end of all this.
For me, again, this kind of boils down to like kind of like what is America, because we have like our Constitution, we have amendments. Like there's actually like an article in the Constitution for fixing things. Like if there's an unjust thing, well, we have this due process.
Right. The idea that just because something has been done in the past doesn't mean that it's right.
Yes.
An appeal to tradition isn't always correct. And I do think that I always find that really interesting in books where magic exists, because a lot of times that is based in like more archaic
traditional
or whatever
stuff.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like whether it be like in the Harry Potter sense of like they have like a Ministry of Magic and they sort of like have their own wizardly traditions and they like reject certain things, and or like their cultural norms, like whatever, like with
they're also super racist to non-magical people.
Like exactly. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying? So there's like it's a similar thing where it's the magical society in books like this gets to be sort of a microcosm for what the world is like. Like, it represents inequality in reality.
Well, I think a lot of that stuff, like even in Harry Potter, it's supposed to be like an allegory of like, well, magic doesn't solve all problems because we still have all these human issues, because at the end of the day, they're still humans.
Right, exactly, because people still have their own, right, if they're actually... They might not be humans, but they are people, if that makes sense. Like, even if you're a demigod or a god, exactly. Well, especially in the Greek mythological sense, we've talked about how in some ways the gods are especially flawed because they're like, if humans could live a very long time and had a bunch of powers, but still were just as like petulant and petty as humans are. So it kind of makes things even worse to some extent. And
B, what are you talking about? I'm getting like a brief taste of what the gods are going through right now through this like quarantine. It's like, I'm living for a long time and realizing I could do whatever I want now. I could like eat cereal in bed if I wanted to right now.
I mean, the thing is, you don't need to be a god to do that. You just need to not care about your body. And I don't know.
Oh man, oh. But yeah, I think what Percy has done here is one of the best things you could possibly do. And it's like, this is pretty much like, he is a hero. This is like HERO, like in all caps. This is what a hero would do. He would sacrifice the most important thing for the more important thing.
Technically, yes, he's not the capital H hero in the way that, like, the prophecy foretold or whatever, but Percy is totally a hero. This is the most heroic thing that anybody has done in any of these books. He's completely restructured this unequal, really messed up system to try and fix it and try and, like, prevent bad things from happening to begin with.
And also he denied power that pretty much he can become a god and still be a problem in the solution, which I kind of like Percy's mentality of like he gets to grow old and die and actually have a life rather than be stuck in this weird limbo.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because then what? Then you like live to like have all your friends die and stuff? Like, that's not fun.
It's a hard thing. It's like one of those tricky roads. And I think Percy Jackson at the end of the day made this huge choice. He's still technically, if you look at the prophecy even more, he's he did make a big change. He actually made a huge choice as well. The prophecy could still be going on in the sense of like he's decided the huge fate of Olympus in the way of, if they decided, hey, let's become a god, the whole chrono cycle would repeat again in the year 4,000 or 6,000 or whatever.
Right, exactly. Then all of a sudden, cut forward thousands of years, and he's become just as jaded and just as petty as all the other gods. You know what I mean? I think in some ways, like the way that he described Luke keeping his attachment to mortality, right? His anchor in all of this has been Annabeth and still like maintaining his humanity. And I think that maintains a certain personality type too. Like, the reason why the gods are so petty and ridiculous and always fighting is because they have limitless power and they've been around for so long that their like perspective is totally skewed. Like they don't really like relate to petty mortal things the same way. And that's part of why they didn't like claim their children or like treat people like humans. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also they've never really been like knocked down a peg at all. Like they've never been beaten down by like life as itself because they can fix it with magic. And that's kind of the hard thing. This is the first time they've gotten a taste of like, oh shit, we could have died. We could have not survived all this stuff. It took our own children to save our problems. That's something to think about, like a child saving a parent in that way of like, may it be financial, may it be powers that be. Like that is a weird, interesting feeling I can only imagine of like a kid saving their parents in this way is interesting to me. Man, there's like, when it comes down to like breaking down these last scenes of Percy Jackson, I always love these because you find like there's an inner dialogue in the sense of like, what is right, what is wrong? Do you do the just thing or do you do like a power grab? And I think at the end of the day, Percy Jackson did the right thing. He's saving more people than just himself. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Yeah. Yeah, I really found that very satisfying. We could talk all day about the different pros and cons of the different like prizes, I guess, or like titles that all of the characters were given. But as far as like a worthy prize, I think is what Percy got because I don't know. I really relate to that desire.
I hope he gets pretty brownie points when he gets to Elysium.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, yeah, it was just like incredibly selfless and responsible, I guess, in a way where. Can you imagine a 16-year-old making that choice? Like, that's amazing. You know what I mean? 16-year-old gets the ability to live forever. And so they're like, no, I want to make life better.
Well, B, this is a fantasy book series.
He's also been through a heck of a lot. So I think it's different than a normal 16-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's seen a lot.
He's seen some shiz in his day. Now, right. B, what is the name of the next chapter?
The name of the next chapter is... Chapter 21, Blackjack gets jacked.
Oh no!
So he gets really strong, I guess? I don't know. Is that like his award for everything past the battle? Is he gets like really strong? I'm not exactly sure what that means or why that would happen. I'm trying to think of like the loose ends that still need to be tied up. Geez, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're going back to camp at some point. I'd like to see what's going on with that. We need to check in with Chiron, see how he's doing. So I imagine they're going to go back to camp and we're going to find out some more things about different characters we haven't already had an update on. But, what did you say again? There's like a couple chapters left, so who knows what's going to happen in the next...
There's a lot of chapters left.
We haven't done a follow-up with Percy's parents, which is another thing we need to check in on. Oh yeah, Rachel Elizabeth Dare, she kind of yeeted out of the Empire State Building at the end of the battle, so she's somewhere, and we need to reckon with her and what's happening with that. Oh, and Annabeth too, like, are they gonna, like, be a thing? Like, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of all, like, the absolute loose ends that have started from the very beginning of the series and, like, what is gonna happen. I don't know, we'll find out.
Yeah, started from the bottom, now we're here.
Oh my god, okay.
So, B, do you want to read some listener emails?
Sure do. So we got a long email, so bear with us as we try to read this. Annabeth Psychology. Let's jump right in and start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a structure that explores the needs every human being has and how important it is that they're met. At the base of the pyramid, there are physiological needs, such as food, shelter, and water. They are precisely what let us survive. Above that tier are safety needs, the feeling of being secure, being healthy, being stable with your resources. Next, we have love and belonging needs, feeling like you have a place within a group, that your best interests are in the heart of another person, etc. These 3 tiers must be met first for any person to thrive.
Now, this pertains to Annabeth specifically because Luke acted as Annabeth's provider along with Thalia and made sure her needs were met. He ensured that Annabeth had food, shelter, water, and clothes. He made sure that she was safe as a child and acted as her protector along with Thalia. Additionally, Luke established early on in Annabeth's part of his family now. He gives her a place to belong. That being said, at an early age, Annabeth develops dependency on Luke and associates him as her provider. He fulfills each essential need that she has. That makes it hard for her in later books to disassociate Luke with the role in her formative years. She still associates with safety, security, and belonging.
On top of this, you have learned helplessness, discovered in one of Pavlov's dog experiments, which allowed psychologists to better understand abuse victims. In the experiment, dogs were separated into 2 groups. One group had an open space blocked off by a fence. The floor gave an electrical current every now and then, and the dogs attempted to get out but couldn't. After numerous hours spent being electrocuted, the scientists removed the wall. The dogs could escape easily, but they didn't. They had learned to be helpless due to their failed attempts to leave before. The other group, the control group, wasn't electrocuted. Without the negative reinforcement of trying to escape, the dogs simply ran off when the wall was removed for them. They didn't learn to be helpless. Sorry, I lost my place.
With Annabeth, she's stuck in the cycle learned of helplessness because bad things happen when she isn't with Luke. The Cyclops event in her childhood was clearly traumatizing. That occurred when she wasn't like Luke again, when she wasn't with Luke. He was talking to Hermes, and that set off a chain of events leading to Luke joining Kronos. Even earlier in her life, when Annabeth first ran away, she was afraid, attacked by monsters, starving until Luke showed up. Once Luke was there, those negative experiences vanished from her. She was secure. As a result, Luke manipulates those psychological triggers, specifically in the Titan's Curse, when he is trapped underneath the sky. He got stuck because Annabeth wasn't there with him. Bad things happen to him when she's not there. Bad things happen to her when he's not there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so far this email is really getting to a lot of stuff. I kind of wish we gave a little bit of warning in the beginning of the email about like animal abuse and stuff. I did not realize the extent of this email, but anyway, recall that in The Lightning Thief, Annabeth hasn't had any negative experiences since her time at camp. Bad things only start happening when she leaves for the quest and when she isn't with Luke. Similarly, Luke gets his scar when he goes on a quest without her.
Then when Luke abandons camp, that's when reality and all sorts of negative events in life start spiraling up. And because this game of, if I could just get him back, bad things will stop happening for the both of us. Even though it isn't necessarily true, essentially she's helpless in helping herself.
But what really makes this dynamic toxic is the fact that both Annabeth and Luke have similar insecurities that feed off of each other. For Luke, he is afraid of appearing weak and has little to no sense of his own social value. He has no idea who he is. Consequently, he seeks to establish some form of control over his identity by becoming a dominant figure in someone else's life. He does so by fulfilling an authoritative role for Annabeth. That becomes his identity, metaphorically speaking, even if it isn't the one he wants nor the one he identifies with.
Similarly, an abuse victim has severe insecurities about their social worth, value, and fear of not being loved. Annabeth has that fear, which is why she ran away. She thinks her family doesn't love her.
Consequently, she's willing to excuse inconsistencies in Luke's behavior as a child and a teenager for the sake of being loved, even if it's small.
What's interesting, though, is that most abusers even have extreme egocentric personalities and lash out when someone doesn't blindly follow that point of view. Luke does this on numerous occasions. Comparatively, victims usually suppress emotions or even don't follow themselves to feel much of anything that isn't attention from the person they idolize, the abuser. Then, when attention is given, they seemingly gorge on it only to feel guilty about it later. It's why Annabeth has such odd mood swings whenever Luke is mentioned, especially after she met Percy.
Why? Well, Percy conflicts with every behavior she associates with kindness, love, and affection. He doesn't act as an authoritative figure. He doesn't go out of his way to be in charge. He doesn't withhold concern or attention. He doesn't have an egocentric point of view. He doesn't take on the responsibility of being Annabeth's sole provider. Percy lets her be entirely independent, and he lets her express her emotions openly. The juxtaposition reflects Annabeth's internal conflict, but she has to realize, that what she thought was normal growing up isn't. It's not how friendships or any relationships are supposed to work.
It's also interesting to point out that Thalia isn't fooled by Luke because she knows the behaviors of his little game. He has the same type of egocentric behaviors as her mother, and Thalia learned to play that game at an early age. Annabeth never had to experience of that traversing an abusive relationship like Thalia did.
All in all, it's extremely complex, and I could write a novel about it if I haven't already. I do apologize that this is as long as it is, but I felt like I could help explain the complex dynamics at play here. Although I do want to say thank you for letting me send in this long email. I love the podcast and listen to it whenever I can. Keep up the good work. Emily Simon, a forensic psychology major, which I didn't see the intro there, but
we're getting down and dirty, aren't we?
Yeah, so, yeah, this is like
yeah, we're getting down and dirty.
Mindhunter. Yeah, that really rings true to me. Most of what was that in that email? I mean, we've said before that basically Annabeth does have the behaviors of an abuse victim. That's kind of the circumstances that she had. She was rejected by her parents and found solace in Luke, and then sort of as such kind of excuses a lot of his worst qualities because she like sees him as a sort of savior in her life in a way that isn't very healthy and functional. And again, as mentioned in the email, the way that she treats Percy is complicated because on the one hand, he's like this source of support that isn't the same as the support that had been modeled by Luke in the past. And I try to remember that, right? Like she grew up with Luke. She was a child when she was in his little group. Like, it's very different than, like, if they were already grown people walking around together. I mean, even if they were just teenagers, but she was a kid and he was older and had, like, a very complicated power dynamic that isn't just, like, oh, she had a crush on him or whatever. Like, he was, like, her provider, and that's all sorts of complicated.
Yeah, and also when it comes down to it, I never really thought about the idea of Luke and Annabeth having to have a codependency on each other. That's something that I guess it makes more sense now that, he literally killed himself because of it.
Right, I thought about Annabeth being dependent on him, but I guess he was also dependent on her because it made him feel like he was useful, which I guess I never really articulated that way, but it totally makes sense that, yeah, he has all sorts of weird insecurities involving his mom and his family and, him going on a quest and then being whatever marred in that way for the sake of what he thinks is nothing because his dad sends him off to do so. Like, he has a lot of complicated stuff going on too. So I guess Annabeth adds like that stability in his life where he's like, see, she like listens to me and sees me as an authority figure.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and also in Percy Jackson where you have a lot of people not sure what to do with themselves when they complete the main quest or whatever. And it's interesting with like Luke when it comes in that way of us like, what do you do now? And also like it's also interesting, like, if you look at people that have been, quote-unquote, radicalized in the sense of, like, a lot of them have, like, self-destructive behaviors because of this. Like, they don't know, up from down in the sense of, like, the things they followed, now they're turning their backs against in that way. And I think it's such an interesting conversation, especially, like, Luke and Annabeth's relationship is such an interesting point of contention because, I don't know, it's hard to explain because, we can talk about it all day from people they'll see it as, like, a romance thing. But then you look at it from a different angle. It's like, well, no, this isn't romance whatsoever. You look at it from a different thing. Is it like a brother or sister type of thing? It's like a Russian roulette game I do not want to play.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when I took forensics, and yeah, this just sort of tracks. I mean, Luke is like basically a murderer, so trying to figure out his psychology is very similar to like the forensic psychology of... Yeah, or what, you mean like Charles Manson? Yeah, I could,
like Charlie.
Because he had like a cult of personality and people did things. I could see that for sure. Yeah, he does not
the devil and I'm here to do the devil's
a normative
work.
Psychology profile, that's for sure. I mean, his mom being unwell and him not having a stable home life, there's a whole lot going on with these characters, and it's sometimes easy to forget that too because it's like a children's book and it's can be sort of just like, oh, we're just having a fun romp, and then you remember that like literally every character is traumatized.
Reality just set into place. Oh no, yeah. This is terrible.
No, like everyone's traumatized. All of the characters are traumatized children. So
well, everybody, see you all in therapy.
Yeah, goodbye everyone, I'll remember you all in therapy.
So I have an email, B, and this one is from Alfie that says, Iris message. I'm a new listener to your podcast, so it might be a month till I hear this review on the show. This is the best podcast I've listened to. For one thing, you view the series from a literary point of view, not a fandom point of view. And another reason is you make a lot of references to other book series that I love, such as Harry Potter. I'm up to the Pony Parties Invade episode. I binge listened to this podcast and never got bored. I also love B's hijinks predicting since I've read the whole series and I'm yelling the answers at my phone. Also, Zach does a great job not spoiling anything. If I was Zach, I would let slip hundreds of spoilers from Alfie, son of Hades. P.S. I'm making a horsing around poster.
I love that horsing around has really just sunk into our listener base as the joke, we have to make a horsing around fan art. I mean, I totally appreciate it because it's just was the dumbest thing that ever was uttered from our lips, and yet you guys love it, so I appreciate that.
That might have been the dumbest tangent I have ever done, because I remember listening to that and being like...
Well, I don't know about that. What about the time that we accidentally talked about sandwiches for a really long time?
Well, that one's lost because you thought that was not a good conversation piece, but I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, we talked about sandwiches for so long. I don't know why.
I think it was a 30-minute conversation.
Were we hungry when we recorded that episode?
Oh, no, I'm just fat. But yeah, no, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I always like when it comes to reviews and stuff. For me, I like going from a literature point of view rather than a fandom point of view, because when you have a fandom point of view, you usually have a sort of a bias a little bit of how do you review it, because you don't want to say bad things about the material that you love, but also what type of interesting points of view can you bring up, because there's nothing wrong with, you can have different dialogues when it comes to a fandom's point of view. You can bring up other things and things you can not think of, but then you look at it from a literature point of view and you have sometimes you might not have an affinity for that material a little bit. You can call things out and see what's good, what's bad, because at the end of the day, we like this material. It's a lot of fun to read. It's a lot of fun to talk about. And that's kind of the great thing about our show is we kind of find this nice, healthy blend in the sense of I can talk about some more fandom-y stuff, even though it's not really fandom-y stuff, but we talk about literature-based stuff. For me, is I think our bread and butter is talking about literature devices and stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad that you do a good job of keeping me mostly in the dark, because I feel like our...
That is a hard thing, though. See, for me, I'm so used...
Sometimes you almost slip. I see it happening, but I don't think you've ever outright spoiled me. I've spoiled myself,
you don't know
mildly,
that yet, B.
because I've seen, tweets or something like that, but you really have done a very good job of mostly keeping me in the dark.
So here's the thing, though, B, is that I'm so used to that because I'm supposed to sign these things called NDAs.
Right, exactly.
So I have
it's
to figure out,
basically an
what
NDA.
do I have to talk about? Yeah, it's pretty much like an NDA. For people that don't know, it's a non-disclosure agreement, meaning let's say I worked on a project. I won't name a project that I've worked on, but I've worked on a project and I had to sign a little piece of paper about it, and I can't talk about it until this time. Oh man, yeah, that's pretty much how it's like. So I'm used to doing stuff like that. B, do you want to read some iTunes reviews?
I sure do. Okay, so we got a few iTunes reviews. First one is from Broken Bird, who says, I love this podcast so much. They really have good insights on the books, and I just really love it. Thank you. What a nice...
Thank you so much.
Oh, I like that your little, description of the review is a pen and a sword. I like that. I
didn't even notice that. And a heart. Yeah.
Little emojis. That was cool.
I love when people do creative stuff like that. So I have one. This one's from Leah, the Hunter of Artemis, says, best podcast. Well, that might be a bias because this is the only podcast I listen to. This podcast is so funny. I listen to it before bed. Me and my sister share a room, and sometimes I almost wake her up with my laughing. I've already read both of the series multiple times, so sometimes I know what's coming. Here is a book recommendation. It's a short book called The Alchemist. It's about life, I think. Just kidding. I think you should really read The Corgi Chronicles. They're dogs with magic. They're dogs and magic. You've already got me at Corgi Chronicles. You got me at Corgi.
You had me at Corgi. Yeah.
It's perfect. Love your show. I've listened to every podcast. I can't wait till you finish the book. A Hunter of Artemis, Leah. You got me at Corgi.
That's adorable. Is this a real book series?
Yeah, this is a real book series.
I might read it. Listen, we're all in quarantine. I might just read a fantasy series about corgis. What else am I doing?
I'm just imagining like the wizard corgi has like a wizard, like Gandalf wizard cap.
The Corgi Chronicles is a real. Oh my god, they're so cute.
Wait, I gotta look this up.
Oh, they're very cute.
I gotta look this up, B. Oh man.
They're so dramatic. Look at their little outfits. Oh my god, they're elves that ride corgis. This is my life goal, is to be an elf that rides a corgi. Look at its little hat. Oh my god, it's so cute. Okay, well.
Oh my god. I love this.
I love this so much.
I love how, for me, I love
Thank you for introducing this to me.
I love this. I would love to have a corgi, or at least a fantasy corgi. I would love, like, just imagine, like, a field with, like, thousands of corgis as, like, a horse brigade, like, coming down the way, just the little legs. Oh, I'd love it. This is how I want to die.
All right, well, I'm gonna read that. Thank you for that recommendation. Next review is from Silly Girl Uni, who says, freaking awesome. I love this podcast. I'm a huge fan of Percy Jackson, and also I love all of the Harry Potter references. I'm an old soul. I'm a teen, and I really love these series they talk about. Must listen.
I love when people say old soul.
I like the quotes around old soul. I feel like old people say that to you a lot when you're a kid.
I'm okay. Before we talk about this, do you remember? I think I've actually used these words as like I'm an old man at heart, even though I'm 14, and realize no, I'm still quite young. I just think of what the personification of being old, an old soul, is like.
Yeah, that's true. People always said that my sister and I were old souls, but I think what they meant was when we were children, we looked like Victorian ghosts, which is a different. Which is a different thing.
Well, I can't prove that you're not Victorian ghosts.
You haven't seen me apparate through walls or cry into my lacrimosa about my long lost love.
Come to think of it, that was really weird when you walked outside, were crying, waiting for your husband who was lost at sea as a captain.
Who's lost at sea? Yes.
Yeah. As you look out at your man-made lake.
Yeah. Go full Gashly Crumb Tiny and then just like fall over.
Yeah, anyway, that's exactly what it's like.
Thank you for the review. And I think we have one more.
It also makes sense because of that coughing. You might have the consumption bee.
Yes, it's true. I've had the consumption for so long.
It's the one curse, the Mr. Poe curse. It's the Mr. Poe disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does Mr. Poe have COVID?
Oh no.
Weigh in the comments.
Once the world finally ends, maybe that's the key. Remember, that's just the city,
cure is in Mr. Poe's blood.
No, the cure is in the horseradish bee.
Oh. No, well, no, that's for
Medusa mycelium.
Medusa mycelium, that's a different.
Well, horseradish is a cure-all.
And remember, folks, cure-alls cure nothing. Shout out to Sawbones.
So we have one from Hey Cam that says, my question. Yo, I love this podcast. I have a question for you. Who is your favorite demigod?
Okay, lightning round because we've done this before. And
Rachel, but she's not a demigod.
Talia. Oh, well, she's not a demigod. You have to say it.
Oh, then
you
Clarice.
Have to say demigod. Okay, Talia, I would say.
I have to say Clarice.
Though, I mean, Percy's really grown on me. This past, book has really made me like him a lot more as a character. He's really grown a lot. But I don't know, I'm kind of leaning towards Talia.
Yeah, I like Clarice. I think she's kind of grown on me a little bit.
She's good too. Clarice is good.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to another amazing episode of Radio Camp Half-Blood. We love you guys so much. Stay safe out there. Wash your frickin' hands. And social distance and be responsible, please. Like, I know it's a scary time, and it's also, people are getting antsy, but you gotta do the right thing, you know? I know in 15 years this joke is gonna become so hilarious when it's in your history books, and we dab. Yeah, it's gonna be a weird time, but I don't want to be living in a historical moment anymore, but we are, unfortunately, so, just be responsible, be safe. Thinking of you guys, and we're gonna keep making episodes. I got some exciting stuff in the works. In the next couple weeks, I'll be on another podcast, which I will announce later, which is exciting. We're recording then, but I don't think my episode will be out for a little while. So, keep your ear to the ground about that. And speaking of which, you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at bkellygorman, and I'm on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41, that's SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. If you want to follow my other show of Gods and Monsters, where I talk about spooky monster movies from a bygone era. Check that out. We just released an episode all about Psycho. That was a lot of fun. If you want to email the show, you can email us at radiocamphalblood@gmail.com. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/radiocamphalblood. We have t-shirts available at TeePublic. Just go to TeePublic and just type in Radio Camp Half-Blood, and you can get a shirt with our logos or our faces on it, and we love it. Well, guys, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And let's keep staying mortal.
Hi, guys.
Right, B? See ya.